Today's video, I want to talk about what essentially is going to be the new scam in retics. And I've talked about this a little bit before, but I thought it was worth noting that I got kicked off the US Dwarf and Super Dwarf Facebook group because of what I was saying about Reach Out Reptiles. And Reach Out Reptiles was making some claims. I'll bring up those claims now because I think it's warranted to have that discussion that everybody's afraid to have because everybody's afraid that it might cost them money if they tell the truth. This is essentially what kind of kicked things off. And somebody was looking for high percentage marble super dwarfs, and somebody posted this. And I immediately started laughing when I saw this because this is making a claim that the male from this breeding will potentially stay smaller than a pure super dwarf male from any of the Calato or Carrampa. Now, I did talk about Carrampas before. I had got in wild caught male Carrampa under 4 feet, and when I popped him, he did have sperm. So I'm not suggesting that adult size is breedable size. I'm suggesting breedable size and full grown size are something totally different. So just because an animal is breedable doesn't mean it's no longer growing, which is pretty common sense, at least everywhere but in the dwarf and super dwarf reticulated python community. So this claim by Reach Out Reptiles is that this animal, the 75% super dwarf, will stay potentially a male as small as 5 feet. And your average pure super dwarf doesn't stay that small if you feed it. If you don't feed it, is this tracking my face? Yes. If you don't feed it, then it just won't grow at all. I mean, honestly, you can keep a super dwarf at 3 feet until it eventually just dies of malnutrition, but that's not really the goal. But this escalated into one of my typical smart-ass, condescending arguments. Big surprise. But my issue with this is how dangerous this information is. Because as Reach Out Reptiles has become the main figure for dwarf and super dwarfs, whatever they say essentially goes. And whatever they say, and this is the important part, somebody else can say. And you can't discredit somebody else who's using the exact same logic and making the exact same claims based on your personal opinion of that individual. You can't do that. I always look at the monitor instead of looking in the camera, by the way. So you can't do that. That's not fair to hold one person in the industry to a different standard and take them at face value on every claim they make. And if it's somebody who you don't particularly like or isn't exactly particularly known to be trustworthy, as well, they can't make the same claim. So the big claim that comes from Reach Out Reptiles and Metcalf Reptiles and some other people is that females, they can make this claim because of the females were used. And Metcalf Reptiles made a similar claim. Now, I didn't screenshot all of this, but if you read it, it goes on further to say that, it depends how the 75% super dwarf was made, because Metcalf Reptiles made the claim that theirs would only get the size of an adult super dwarf because they use pure females. Well, the argument ensued after that I posed the absolute known fact that there is no scientific data to suggest that overall potential retic length is sex linked. And for a female to have a much greater impact on overall length than a male, then by necessity it means that it is sex linked. And there's nothing to support that. And I've also talked about that if you want to make that claim, you would have to raise up entire clutches, feed them the exact same way, and then however those percentages were created for that clutch, do it in the exact opposite way with the genetic switched on the male and female, raise up that entire clutch, and feed those babies the exact same way with the same amount of food, and then collect your data, because there's no genetic data to prove it. So nobody has ever done that. And the claims people are making, and this is where this video is going on the new scam of retics, which is bloodlines, which isn't a scam but can be exploited very easily to scam people, which I'll get into directly. So, since nobody has ever taken a full clutch from a pure super dwarf bred to a mainland female, raised up every single baby, and saw what happened, and then taken a pure mainland to a pure super dwarf female, raised up every single baby from the clutch, and then measured them all, the data just doesn't exist. So you can't rationally make this claim that females have a greater impact on overall potential size of retic offspring, because there's no empirical data and there is no scientific genetic data to show a sex link for size determination in reticulated pythons. That was kind of the argument that ensued, and then one of Reach Out Reptiles' employees said that Reach Out Reptiles had never made that claim. Then things kind of went on from there. Then I pointed out that Reach Out Reptiles hadn't been working with dwarfs and super dwarfs really all that long, and most of their stuff that they have acquired has been in the last 5 years. So there's absolutely no possible way that Reach Out Reptiles can really make any significant claims in terms of bloodline to know which is going to what's truly staying smaller than anything else, because a lot of stuff had went through me or went through other people that actually cared about wild-caught retics before the ban and before their prices went up. And then I got kicked off. But my agitation with all of this is the largest name in dwarfs and super dwarfs start making these claims, that it becomes problematic, because there is no reason that somebody else can't make ridiculous claims like that. Why can't, if it's okay for Reach Out Reptiles, then it's okay for Slither. That's just a fact. Now, Slither is going to take it much further and make a much more ridiculous claim, but if you want to start claiming bloodlines as proof of overall potential size, then you need a massive amount of data to back up that claim, which is the production and then the raising of massive amounts of offspring with the appropriate amount of food, not little amounts of food that's going to stunt their growth and keep them on the small side. Appropriate amounts of food, and in some cases inappropriate amounts of food, to really push them to their full genetic potential to see how big they can get. Because if a snake is never pushed to its maximum potential via food intake, you can't say you know how small it really is or how big it really is, because you have never done anything to find out. I have pushed my ternates harder than I should have, and they're all kind of bigger than they would be or should be if I wouldn't have fed them that way, but I needed to do that. So somebody had pointed this out to me, and Slither had made this argument, and then, but of course I'm blocked, so they wanted to see somebody make an argument against it, but then somebody like me who would actually say something can't because I'm blocked. Okay, so I'm going to show you the original post. The saddest aspect of the retic community right now, someone new to keeping retic proudly posts pictures of a new retic that they love and mistakenly give false locality super dwarf information, either due to ignorance or because they bought the animal from a shady dealer. Now I'm going to stop and break that piece down, and I don't think I need to point out the irony of Slither complaining about shady dealers giving out misinformation on genetics, localities, and, well, pretty much everything. So that's a little too on the nose to even talk about. And the locality percentage police attack them and make them feel less excited or unhappy about the animal that they were so proud of. I get hit up constantly about, is this snake what they said what I was told it was. I don't know. People, that is one of the best things. That is one of the most entertaining and agitating things that retic breeders have to deal with, especially people that know what they have and aren't ripping people off and lying. So it's so amusing. Like somebody just posted a 75% super dwarf the other day, and it didn't look like it had 7% super dwarf in it, let alone 75%, and everybody's just laughing. But what are we supposed to do? So, okay. And I want to talk about the locality percentage police. Now, the point of tracking bloodlines is so you know what you have. And one of the easiest ways to know what that animal is to attach locality percentages to it. That's the easiest way to keep track. The easiest way to keep track. So, and from that percentage, you can make a lot of educated guesses of what that animal's going to look like as an adult, how big it's going to be, and what its offspring are going to look like, and potentially the impact of those bloodlines on size of offspring. And that's undeniable because you can look at the size of the offspring when it hatches out and see that impact. So that's a legitimate thing to do. And this is an attempt to try to undermine the easiest possible way for the reticulated python community to keep track of the bloodlines of our snakes. So, okay, attacks them and makes them feel less excited or unhappy about the animal that they were so proud of. Absolutely terrible. Most of you experts did the same thing. Most of you experts didn't own a retic till a couple years ago, blah, blah, blah. Most of you are constantly in my DMs questioning my information, blah, blah, blah. Most of you felt exactly what it feels like to be bullied or ostracized, but you perpetrate the same bullying behavior on others. You take a long, hard look in the mirror, blah, blah, blah. Okay, now this is where it gets good. And I don't have all of this post, unfortunately. You should consider allowing people to enjoy their animals for the beautiful creatures that they are instead of your idea that quality based on some obscure percentage pedigree that none of you can prove definitively. Well, if somebody wants a 75% super dwarf, they want a 75% super dwarf because one, it's going to stay a lot smaller, and two, maybe they like the color, look, or whatever. Or if they're into morphs, they want a pretty nice morph that's going to be a manageable size. So this percentage pedigree, which is not really a pedigree, does have a good place. But if you want to start making claims about bloodlines, like if you ever watch the Rob Clark Python video on dwarfism, which I highly recommend beyond any retic video ever made, watch that video. It is absolutely hilarious. But he makes the claims that he doesn't care about what percentages or localities or any of that because he's going to personally selectively breed mainlands down to dwarf and super dwarf sizes, which is absolutely ridiculous. But turns out he's not the only one making that claim. Somebody just recently made that claim showing one small runt-looking genetic stripe on one of the groups claiming that it was basically a super dwarf. Okay, so we're going to go to the next one. I'm going to start calling you out publicly, bullying the bullies. Let me see that type of shit happen in my groups, and you will be exposed. You got to remember, I'm blocked from this group because I would have called this shit out in 2 seconds publicly. So I can't do it. Nobody can question this because anybody that would is getting tossed out of the group. So, okay, can everyone tell how angry this ridiculous behavior makes me? I lose respect more and more for you every single day, and it's really sad. Platinum Anery Motley Sunfire Tiger 25% Calatoa Super Dwarf. This mutt is only 25% Super Dwarf and will stay smaller than your pure 100% pedigree animals. Why? Why? Why would that stay smaller? For that statement to be true, and his next statement to be true, or this 50% Calatoa Super Dwarf that doesn't look like your typical Calatoa Super Dwarf because pattern is specifically bred to look like mainland, but will stay as small as 100% Calatoa Super Dwarf. come at me with that ridiculousness. Pick someone who has the knowledge to make a legitimate argument. I'll make a legitimate argument, but I can't. See, there's absolutely no reason to think that something that's only 25% superdwarf would ever stay as small or smaller than a 100% superdwarf. For that to be true, you would have to have managed to get a hold of some insanely small mainland genetics that were essentially some type of genetic mutation to keep the animal smaller. So you got to remember, a typical superdwarf averages 6 to 9 feet. So you and an average mainland averages 12 to 20. Even males on the small side for mainlands get over 9 feet. And that's the small side, not the large side, not the average side. That's the small side. So you would have to somehow get these animals that for some reason don't have the genetics that every other mainland retic has. So the only argument that can be made here is, well, these are specific bloodlines that have been bred down to be really small. Slither hasn't been out of jail long enough to create some sort of new line. This would take like 100 years to do. It would take literally at least 100 years of breeding to create these small ass mainlands. And even then, it's unlikely that you're really able to get those genes to line up in that way, because as far as we know, retic size genetics are polygenic, meaning there's a whole bunch of different genes that go into determining the actual size of the snake. It's like people, it's like everything else. It's not a single gene that determines overall potential growth. And even if you have 2 small adult retics, it doesn't mean that those genetics are going to line up in a way that are going to make snakes as small or even smaller than they are. It's very unlikely. And when you're working with 75% mainland blood, or even half mainland, half 35-7% mainland and 35-7% dwarf, there is no possible way that a 25% superdwarf is going to stay smaller on average than a 100% pure superdwarf animal. Now, he doesn't actually make the claim 100% perfect pedigreed animals. So that can kind of be misleading, and that's something you can say where you can imply something, but when somebody calls you out on it, you say, well, I said that could mean 100% pure Sulawesi, or that could mean 100% pure Sumatran or Javan. But if you say that, well, then this argument doesn't make any sense, because of course a 25% superdwarf is probably going to stay smaller than a central Sulawesi. So the only thing that Slither could possibly have meant by this 100% pedigree animal was 100% superdwarf. But, and he does it here again with this 50% superdwarf animal, and claiming it'll stay smaller, and he does make it, but will stay smaller than a 100% superdwarf. Why? Where are the downsizing genetics coming from? Because if the pure superdwarfs, and this is an important point, if the pure superdwarfs aren't providing the genetics to create smaller retics than themselves, then the only genetics being implicated in this downsizing must be coming from the mainland genetics. And mainland genetics, as we all know, don't supply those kinds of genes. They make animals bigger, not larger. So there is no way this is factual. This is pure garbage. But how can we argue against this? How can we argue against this? We know it's nonsense, but this is an argument of downsizing via bloodlines and locality traits. But Slither gets to make this argument. And the reason he gets to make this argument is because of this right here. The biggest name in super dwarfs making a similar, yet not as absolutely ridiculous claim, but it's the same argument. Well, it was a small female, and it was a pure female, and females magically somehow have more influence on overall potential growth than males do. So if Reach Out Reptiles gets to make the claim that they have the ability with their bloodlines to make super dwarf crosses that potentially stay smaller than pure super dwarfs, or if Metcalf Reptiles gets to make the claim that their same genetics, literally, of the same exact animals, basically, their SD crosses only get the size of a pure super dwarf, then guess what? Everybody else gets to make that claim as well, and they get to make that claim until the empirical evidence proves them wrong. Now, we know the logical evidence means everybody's lying, but if Reach Out Reptiles can do this, Slither can do this. Why can't he? See, I've noticed that people like to shit on Slither a lot. And I think it's funny because a lot of those people that will either say it publicly or a lot of them say privately, I'll still do business with the guy. I have personally never done business with Slither, unlike Reach Out Reptiles, unlike Nerd, unlike a lot of people. Because of this. This is why. And so when I was really arguing with people the other day and I got kicked off of that US Dwarf and Super Dwarf group, this is why. And this was the point I was trying to make, that when the biggest name in super dwarfs and dwarfs wants to make a claim, everybody else will exploit that claim as well. And there isn't a better example of exploitation. And those types of claims allow for somebody to make an argument that a 25% super dwarf or 50% super dwarf will stay smaller than a pure super dwarf. Because you can't tell them they can't say that if you say a 75% super dwarf, 12.5% Solaire, and then a mix of some other stuff, Sumatran and other stuff, because that's where marble came from, will stay as small as 5 feet. You can't tell Slither they're wrong, at least for saying that or making that claim. Now, we know they're wrong. We know that's a lie. But that's what happens. 10 years ago, I was considered just as much of a jerk off as I am now, and a shit talker and all this stuff. And all I've ever done is really tell the truth. Now, how have I told it in a maybe condescending, dickheaded way? I think it's entertaining, or a lot of times I'm making jokes and it just doesn't come across well. But yeah, okay, so whatever. I'm a jerk off. Well, but I'm still telling the truth, and I get called out so for shit talking. It's not shit talking if it's true. If I'm saying something and somebody is finding it offensive because I'm saying it about somebody they like or something that or I'm challenging a belief or an idea, that is not shit talking. That is just when I state a fact, it's not shit talking. When I state a fact that it is irresponsible for Slither to make a ridiculous claim that their super dwarf crosses will stay smaller than a pure super dwarf, most people are okay with it. But when I say it is ridiculous for Reach Out Reptiles to make a claim that their super dwarf crosses will potentially stay smaller than a pure super dwarf, well, hell, you're shit talking. But see, and that's what you need to understand. All these people take a shit all over Slither and say all these names because they feel comfortable doing it because so many people do it. When, what's the difference between him and Jay? If what he's doing is so wrong, and this massive overproduction of retics is so wrong, and this ridiculous claims on genetics and sizes is so wrong, why isn't it wrong when Jay does it? Why isn't it wrong when Bob does it? And this is where this is all going. I don't know if anybody saw the nerd video, how they're downsizing. And it was because of food and it's expensive. No, it's not. It's because mainland retics aren't selling. That's the fact. Everybody's watching Reach Out Reptiles, killing it, just straight murdering it. And everybody else's snakes aren't selling. So what do you think they're going to do? When Nerd put out that video, they started talking about how they're getting rid of a lot of the mainland stuff, and they have smaller genes, and they got smaller localities, and blah blah blah. Well, guess what we're about to see from Nerd? Because it's Bob's stuff already popped up on Morph Market. Jay's stuff is now magically all kinds of dwarfs. You have Slither with 25% super dwarfs that stay smaller than 100% super dwarfs. This is what happens. But 10 years ago, I saw a huge issue in retics, and that was with prehistoric pets. And they're like world's first, new clutch, blah, blah, blah. And back then, I said this overproduction of retics is going to kill retics. All these people were trying to make world's first, like prehistoric pets, and most of their world firsts were garbage. And they were breeding head to head, and making all these animals to try to hit, or double head to double head, or whatever, and they would make 30, 40, 50, 60 animals in a single clutch to try to hit and get this 1 in 16 or 1 in 32 odds. And then you have this massive pile of animals that you now got to find homes for because nobody wants to call, so they just get dumped and the prices come down. And I called that shit 10 years ago. And I was talking shit, and I was jealous, and I was a dick. No, I was trying to explain to people what the reality was of overproduction and what happened. See, at the end, Jay was kind of the biggest name. 10 years ago, Jay was kind of like the real big name with Nerd and Bob, but he was the one really producing a massive amount of stuff. And I said that when you got the biggest name essentially in retics pushing these ideas of the importance of world's first, the importance of producing as many animals as you can, and denying the fact that the market would become incredibly oversaturated very quickly, and it would cause major amounts of issues for the market itself, the industry as a whole, and it would lead to a lot of people getting these animals that shouldn't have them, and we all see how that has worked out. Prehistoric managed to collapse the UK market before the US market collapsed, and the US market was on the verge of losing the ability to ship these animals across state lines. And I called the UK crash and said it was going to happen before the US crash, and it did. And the truth is, mainland retics haven't sold well since about 2012. 2012 was the last year I saw. What? One of my lights just died. Yeah. What the hell? No, something died. I don't know what did. 2012 was the last year that I really saw a huge demand for mainland retics. And it's just been this steady progression towards dwarf and super dwarf ever since. And it's the last safe haven, essentially, for retics. And that's why it's so important that the information being put out there is correct and accurate. Because just like everybody trying to implement prehistoric's approach of mass production, world's first, which led to the crash, if the biggest name in reptiles now, or the biggest name in retics now, promotes ideas of bloodlines and making claims that their SD crosses will potentially stay smaller than pure super dwarfs, that's what other people are going to exploit, and they're going to use that to their advantage to sell things like 25% Kalatoas and make the claim that their bloodlines are so small that their 25% Kalatoas will stay smaller than somebody else's 100% Kalatoa. And it's laughable, but at the same time, you can't call out one without calling out the other. And nobody but me wanted to call out Jay 10 years ago. And nobody but me wants to call out reach out reptiles now. So this will be the demise of the dwarf and super dwarf market, because all these new retic keepers that don't know better, and when they see the largest, most well-known, most trusted name in super dwarfs making claims along the same line of logic as Slither is, they're going to end up trusting Slither, and they're going to end up trusting everybody who's making those claims. So that's what you need to understand. The new scam in retics is bloodline. Bloodlines are the only way we have to track these animals. And since everybody essentially has the dwarfs and super dwarfs now, the name of the game is to have the smallest retics. So now it's my Kalatoas are smaller than so-and-so's Kalatoas. And the main lands that I'm using to do the morph crosses, well, those bloodlines are smaller than so-and-so's bloodlines. And this is where the crash is going to occur, because now all of a sudden everybody's ridiculous claims are made legitimate by the largest name in retics making the same claims. Just like 10, 12 years ago, everybody's dumbass head-to-head breedings that produce 50 eggs were made legitimate and considered a good idea because Prehistoric Pets was doing the same shit. So that is where my frustration comes, and that's the mindset that I'm in, because I'm looking ahead and seeing the only viable piece of the retic industry getting destroyed because of ridiculous claims about bloodline size, and my snakes are smaller than your snakes, and my cross will stay smaller than a pure. But this is what's coming, and this is what I said would happen. I said this years ago. You can read the pin post on retic eugenics. I said people were going to start lying about bloodlines and localities. And that's all that we've seen since the prices have went up. So this is obviously going to be a public video because I mentioned different people's names in it, so I don't want to make it private. And this video is going to piss a lot of people off. But I would rather be seen as the dick now that in a couple years is proven right than the jerk off lying to everybody so I can sell my snakes. That's more important to me. You know, it's more important to try to create a sustainable retic market than it is to push a sell. And other breeders need to start being more responsible, and they need to start calling out this behavior that will create the price, that the behavior that's creating a large bubble via misinformation, and the mass production that's going to create the crash. If you don't, your animals will lose value in a very short time, because it doesn't matter if you're producing 75% super dwarfs. You have to put those against claims from breeders that people believe when they say their 75% super dwarf will potentially stay smaller than a pure. And against those breeders that are actually saying their 25% super dwarf will stay smaller than your 75% super dwarf or your pure super dwarfs. If you don't speak up and it's just me looking like an asshole, like usual, saying shit, your animals are going to be worth nothing. That I can promise you. The super dwarf and dwarf market will turn into the mainland market if people aren't willing to, one, be responsible, two, put out quality information, and three, have the fucking balls to tell the truth and to call somebody out when they're lying about something, or at least pressure them behind closed doors. If you don't want to call them out publicly, you need to say something privately, because if you don't, everyone is going to start saying that their retic with a minimal amount of super dwarf blood in it comes from bloodlines that are smaller than your pures, and they are actually going to sell the snake. You're going to lose sales to this kind of behavior. It's inevitable. So if you want to protect your own investment, your own projects, and what you enjoy doing with these snakes, you have to be willing to start telling the truth. And if people want to call you a dick, if people want to call you a liar, let them do it. They've been saying that about me for over a decade, and I still sell snakes, and I still have friends, and I still do okay. So it's not the end of the world if somebody on Facebook says you're a dick. Trust me, it happens to me pretty much every day.